Good evening, Sonia. It's your lunchtime in London, right?
That's right.
Okay, that's good. So before we get into the climate change, I'm always curious that how do people end up into an area called climate change, and then people get very professional and uh, very excited and very passionate about this field. And I feel that you are very passionate about climate change. So maybe we can start. How did you get into this field? And
Um, that's right. No, I am very passionate about this area. And I think in my case, to be honest, it's like a need to save the planet from impending climate disaster kind of runs through my bloodstream because it really is. It's a family business in many ways. So my mother works for Greenpeace in the 1990s as coordinating big actions against, at the time it was really on toxic waste issues. My stepfather did the same. Uh, my father runs a global network of members of parliament from around the world working together on climate change and renewable energy and energy access. My aunt has written a book on how we can use meditation and internal work to help overcome the fear of climate change and the sort of the and help trigger more internal action, because as you can see, it's really a family business. And so I think I was probably always destined to do something in this space. And indeed, I went to university to study politics, and I decided to do my thesis, my dissertation, on an analysis of the EU Renewable Energy Directive, and then later ended up working in the European Parliament in Brussels on EU renewable energy legislation, and it went from there. So that's kind of how I got into this area. And I also spent 5 years working specifically in the solar PV industry and for solar PV industry associations in the UK and the EU, and now work for E3G, a global independent climate change think tank.
wow, okay, that's very, very impressive. So you have seen the transition when climate change used to be just a side talk, um, just few interested people talks about it, and getting into the big debate now looks like almost the tide is turning, and then it's becoming mainstream. So you have watched that. Can you explain what have you seen, how things have changed over the years?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, but I was at university between 2005, 6, 7, 8. And already then I would say, there was a big awareness amongst the student population of the climate change challenge and of environmental issues. So, I think I've always been knee deep in this. But if you think of the work that E3G tries to do, we're called third generation environmentalism. And the way I interpret that, and everyone has their own definition of what third generation environmentalism is, but it is exactly what you say, actually. It's about mainstreaming climate change into every policy area, into every part of government, into every part of society, getting that real economy change, and taking a very mainstream approach to how to do this. Whereas you could say first generation environmentalists were very much the kind of the very early sort of conservationist, limits to growth type people. Second generation environmentalists are more those Greenpeace sort of action alerts, if you remember, then from the sort of 70s and 80s and 90s. And we are now third generation environmentalists, and it's very interesting to also think what the next generation is, and whether it's, you know, whether it's about even more mainstream environmentalism, or if it's now also about new types of politics like social movements like Extinction Rebellion and that kind of thing. But no, in many ways my aim and that of E3G as a think tank is to really mainstream climate awareness in every part of policy, of society, and of policy making.
Okay, I mean, I think yesterday I was just pondering, sitting in the balcony, saying, this is already September, and January we were sitting outside, and how COVID-19 was a Chinese problem, and we are all looking from a distance that these people are suffering. It's not my problem, right? And then now it is everybody's problem, and how quickly it has become everyone's problem. Everyone is monitoring the whole world on the same benchmark. What's the number of people getting infected and X percentage? The whole world. Now, climate change still, it seems, is someone else's problem for a lot of people. So how far are we away from when it becomes everybody's problem? What do you think?
I think,
I mean, Paris Agreement brought it to the sort of dinner table discussion, but still it feels it's in some schools, still people think it's not my problem.
Yeah. And I think that's true all over the world. You know, in Europe, people think it's not my problem. In America, people think it's not my problem. In Africa, in Asia, and it is a real problem. And I think there you're almost getting into this climate psychology, right? What is it about the nature of this particular challenge that means that it tends to lead to this kind of burying your head in the sand, this feeling of powerlessness, this feeling, this tragedy of the commons as well, and have, you know, and why is it difficult? Why has it been a challenge over the years to really get international multilateral action on this? And I think it comes partly from the real nature of the challenge, but also our own psychology and how we approach these kinds of big problems. And are they almost too big for many people to deal with, and therefore they feel that it must be someone else's problem? And I think we have to overcome that kind of thinking, and we need to communicate it in such a way that it becomes clear that it is all of our responsibility to do something about it, and that there is a lot that we can all do. There's a lot that governments can do, and to make the link between the on the ground impacts, whether they be wildfires in Australia, whether they be drought in the Sahel, whether they be you know, issues around floods here in the UK, make a link between those impacts, but also, you know, the impacts on different industries, whether they be a worker in an auto factory in Germany, or in a coal mine in Virginia. Make a link between what is happening to those people and the overall phenomenon of climate warming and climate heating and climate change. And I think it is really important to somehow adapt our communication to human psychology and the way we think we can best deliver that change.
Well, maybe yes and no. No, you know, so far the climate change message have been just a standard message. The world is warming up. Some people will lose houses and this and that, and globally, and people say it's not my problem, right? But you see what happened in the coal industry. When I talk to a senior government official or something, I don't tie to the coal or any fossil fuel discussion to climate change. I basically saying, listen, I just threw away half a dozen of brand new DVDs with the DVD player, read-write, because they are useless. I mean, do you want to invest into assets? They will be useless on day one. You might be in jail for investing in those assets, knowing well this was coming. And then you get an attention of the minister instantly. Stranded asset is a big risk. So I think climate message maybe also need to somehow tie up with in terms of economic loss at personal level. Like you say, COVID-19, nobody cared until you realize that, yes, I can be hospitalized.
Yeah.
Someone I know passed away. No, it is so
Yeah.
close to home.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I think that's right. And I think there are so many reasons why the transition to a low carbon and zero carbon economy, it makes real economic and industrial strategy sense. And that's true. You know, you could, the argument you just made in terms of stranded assets also applies to gas. Like, you know, what do we think gas prices are going to do over the next 10, 20, 30 years? There too, there are potential stranded asset risks. The electrification of heat and transport and other things also means that our energy system is going to really change. So sector coupling as well of the different parts of the system. So there is a very strong argument to be made around the financial risks around investing in parts of the economy that are likely to have to go through a transition. And indeed, if you look at, for example, the World Bank Group's approach paper to the COVID-19 crisis, there is an explicit mention there that says, you know, we should reconsider coming out of this crisis. There are certain industries and sectors where we should reconsider whether it makes sense to continue investing in these sectors, given that the need for those sectors to change, high carbon sectors, for the sectors to change over the next critical decade. And so there is a very strong argument to be made in terms of, you know, and the EIB, the European Investment Bank, said this when they were considering their energy lending policy last year. This makes sense. It makes financial sense, and it's good, sound, responsible banking to be focusing on renewable energy and energy efficiency and green energy solutions and low carbon energy, and to be getting out of investments in coal, oil, and gas.
Yeah. I mean, the same thing applies for gasoline car or a diesel car today as opposed to electric car, because your car might last 15, 20 years, but you may not be able to sell a car in 10 years' time. I don't know. I mean, where the market will go, because the operating an electric car will be maybe 1/10 of today's gasoline cars. So it's almost like a solar, like a running a coal plant. You suddenly realize the operation cost of a coal plant on a daily basis may be more expensive than junking this and building a brand new solar.
Absolutely.
So
and that's why
point.
and that's why, you know, there are interesting financial instruments that are emerging that make financial sense to retire high carbon infrastructure like coal and to replace it with low carbon infrastructure like solar or wind. And you could imagine the same in the transport sector, because the savings are so huge. And you've seen this with bonds, especially sort of bond issuances in Colorado and other parts of the US. There's talk of this kind of instrument potentially in Europe as well, if we can make it work with state aid rules. You know, you can think of the switch from high carbon power generation or vehicle manufacturing, whatever it is, to low carbon often makes financial sense, and you can come up with financial instruments to help this early retirement and replacement of this kind of infrastructure.
Paris Agreement, right? I mean, we all know about it, and this was a big celebration, big expectation. Do you think the world has changed much in terms of before and after Paris Agreement?
I think so. I think so. I remember being at home that day that it was the gavel came down and the thing was signed, and I had tears running down my face. I was so emotional by what we had achieved, um and I think the world is a different place having that international framework of cooperation, a very bottom-up framework for trying to find a way to work together to solve this problem. And I think also that one of the big differences between the 2008, 2009 financial crisis and this COVID-19 economic crisis is that we do have a certain number of international agreements and international frameworks that help us see the direction of what the recovery needs to go in. So I do think the Paris Agreement was a game changer. It is an international norm that then other parts of the economy can use as a guide and build on. And for example, I work in the financial sector, and specifically in terms of public finance, and more public financial institutions like multilateral development banks, like bilateral development banks, are coming together to make that commitment to align their operations with the Paris Agreement. So it's really becoming the kind of the overarching norm in this area. And hopefully next month, in November, we will see more hundreds and hundreds of public banks from around the world make that same commitment. And it really helps to have this overarching goal and these nationally determined contributions, these country-driven plans, in order to then work out how we're going to implement this on the ground.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Paris Agreement created that fantastic awareness. Even the disbelievers suddenly take notice, right? That's something big happened. But the NDCs, still a lot of those NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, right? That means the commitment that voluntarily countries made. But some of them are not backed up by real plans, right? So they have to update those plans very soon, no?
Absolutely. They really should be updating those plans this year. And I really think that countries not only should be updating their national climate change plans, these nationally determined contributions, to make them more ambitious and more detailed, and to really think about how they are a plan to transform their economies, but also they should be thinking about how these nationally determined contributions can be a blueprint for their recovery out of the COVID-19 crisis, in the sense that we all want to see a better, a greener, a more resilient and more just recovery. And so I think, we need to ideally see the process of updating national climate change action plans and national COVID-19 crisis recovery plans as one and the same. But I totally agree with you that nationally determined contributions are of varying detail, varying quality, varying levels of ambition. Of course, all of this is part of the bottom-up nature of the Paris Agreement and why the Paris Agreement was a success. But, it is really important to also think, okay, so how are we going to finance these plans now? How are we by bringing in new finance, usually in many cases concessional finance, how do we help these plans come to reality and then also create that space to be able to make them more ambitious? And in that sense, there's a lot of people doing a lot of good work in this area, including the Nationally Determined Contributions Partnership, NDC Partnership, which is really kind of helping coordinate the delivery of these, the support for the delivery of these plans. And I really do hope that this year and next year, in the run-up to the big climate conference in Glasgow in November of 2021, that we will see significant change in many of these plans and significant upscaling of the ambition in these country plans in order to really be able to say that they collectively deliver the 1.5 and 2 degree targets, which at the moment, as we know, they don't. So we really need them to become better, more ambitious, more long term as well, and we need them to be able to, we need to be able to say that together this delivers the overall targets of the Paris Agreement.
1.5. I think 2 degrees is good enough, because all those commitments that are in place, that's not going to deliver 2 degrees, no, based on current modeling.
No.
So yeah.
No.
So 1.5 is a very distant dream. What are the big ticket items do you think is going to happen next year? I know UK is a host, and there are a lot of discussion, a lot of money being put on the table, and all the COVID recovery money. So countries should rethink their NDCs in a big way, because solar prices, battery prices, electric car prices all have come down quite significantly since those commitments were made, including prices for LEDs.
That's right, and that in many ways was one of the big difference between Copenhagen and Paris, right? In Copenhagen, in the climate conference in Copenhagen, you know, we hadn't yet seen that huge reduction in prices for solar PV and batteries and electric vehicles, whereas in 2015 in Paris we did, and that was part of what allowed policymakers to be bold in making these commitments. I think next year, there are a number of big moments that are going to come out. And I think in many ways, you know, it's all about how do we use this recovery and build back better from the COVID-19 crisis in order to deliver the change we need in terms of climate change, but also in terms of digitalization and decentralization and so on. I think the two G20 and G7 presidencies and summits are going to be very important as well. UK has the presidency of the G7, Italy has the presidency of the G20, and the two then are co-hosts of the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow in Milan, and then Glasgow in November of next year. So I think, you know, making sure that the G7 and the G20 come together is really important. I think also that there is a real need for multilateral development finance to come together, and for countries, for big donors to make clear that there is significant money on the table in order to help every corner of the world recover from the COVID crisis, and make sure that's a better recovery and a greener recovery. And so I would hope that the various moments across the rest of this year and next will deliver that. And then, you know, another moment that has really emerged is, in terms of the end of this year, and which may well be repeated next year, is the Finance in Commons Summit in Paris, which has emerged as the big moment where we try and shape the public finance response to the COVID-19 crisis. The first time all public development banks, big and small, multilateral, national and subnational, will come together for the first time in Paris on the 12th of November, both physically and virtually, to make a commitment to work together to deliver a better recovery, and to work together to all help deliver the Paris Agreement, the Global Convention on Biological Diversity, to protect our nature and our species and our biodiversity, and to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, which are so important and which really need additional focus and finance as well.
One of the interesting question, let me ask is this way. One of the debates that I was sitting in about coal, someone argued at one point, he lost the patient. He said, if not now, when?
Yeah.
That actually sums up very nicely, no? Because we all know that this is a path we have to cross. Eventually, it's like sluggishly pressing your alarm bell saying, okay, I'll sleep in for another half an hour, right? But you know you have to get up. So
That's right. And there comes a moment where you've pressed the snooze button so many times that it's time to just give yourself that kick in the backside and get out of bed. No, that's right. And if not
Especially
now,
if you have to catch a flight, right? Because you know.
oh,
So
oh,
how much
yeah,
can we push? I think that's where we are right now, no? If
yeah.
not, when?
I think there are so many signs from all over the world, from the private sector, from the public sector, that, coal is on its way out, and that coal finance is on its way out, and the world is moving in a particular direction. And I have colleagues who are very involved in the Powering Past Coal Alliance, which is an alliance of 24 governments plus many other subnational governments plus companies working together to really phase coal out of the energy system in their countries and beyond. And it's so true. If not now, then when? The time has come. And I also see that the next year could be, could add more signals till the end of coal and the end of coal finance, but also the beginning of the end of oil and gas finance. You see more and more institutions starting to think again about their investments in oil and gas in the private sector and in the public sector. You're seeing more and more exclusions applying to different parts of the oil and gas value chain, more and more risks associated with these investments in terms of market risks and economic risks and stranded asset risks. And so, there is a real move in that direction as well. Obviously, clearer picture as with coal, but I think there's no doubt in my mind that this year and next year will start to see the beginning of the end of oil and gas finance as well.
Yeah, I mean, look what Saudi Arabia is doing, right? They are now financing solar everywhere. And one of our
Amazing.
friend was explaining the underlying strategy is they're the lowest cost oil producer. So they might be
Mm,
the last country sitting and selling oil because they're the lowest
mm,
cost. As the demand drops, then cost curve will creep up. So all the people that are low volume, high cost producer will shut down slowly. So ultimately, of course, the
mm,
market will belong to the lowest cost producer. So
mm.
his view was them now moving to solar, they're maximizing that how much of this stranded asset they can potentially sell in the market.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's very smart. And it's very interesting to see these kind of strategies coming from a lot of other countries, and to see such great companies coming out of Saudi Arabia. I think I'm right in saying that Aqua Power, ACWA, is one of the biggest solar PV developers in the world, a Saudi company. And so it's really exciting to see also the prices in terms of solar that some of these calls for tender in the Gulf are achieving. Like we're seeing record levels of prices of levelized cost of electricity, of price per kilowatt hour in these tenders. Now, of course, you always got to be careful. Not all bids in different tenders around the world are comparable. Not all tenders around the world are comparable, but fundamentally, solar PV obeys Moore's law, just like computer chips do. They're both silicon technologies. Swanson's law says that every time you double manufacturing capacity, you see a big drop in price, and that is going to continue basically. And so the price of solar has come down 80% in the last 10 years and will continue to come down. And so people are constantly betting as to where it's going to go next. And may I say, and this is often an unpopular opinion, but I do think the world has a lot to thank the Chinese for in this area. I think, back in, when was it? 2006, 2007, 8, 9, the People's Republic of China essentially decided that as part of their industrial strategy, they were really going to invest in solar PV and in solar PV manufacturing capacity. And China Development Bank played it, the national policy driven investment bank played a big role in this. And I think that the world has a lot to thank China for really bringing the cost of solar PV down. Now, I know that there have been a lot of problems along the way, and there have been some potentially dubious trade practices, but I think that is all now dealt with and in the past. And so I think in many ways the Chinese don't get enough thanks for that. And the same is happening with battery technology and electric vehicles that happen with solar PV. And the key thing is that when to really ramp up to at scale manufacturing to bring unit costs down.
Yeah, because I remember I used to use a slide that when I first bought my computer, 10 megabyte hard disk I bought for $2,000 and I was super excited. And on that basis, like a $200 a megabyte, today the 8 gigabyte flash drive or a 5 gigabyte flash drive that you get for free at conferences will be costing $3-4 million. So
Yeah,
it was unimaginable at that time that someone will give you for free a $3 million piece. That's what it was costing, right?
Yeah.
So I used to argue that, look, this solar panel used to cost $7,000. Today it costs $100. It was quite dramatic. But the funny thing is, today that thing costs $28. It has come down even more. So sometimes it's sort of, you look, you think, you said, unbelievable.
Yeah.
So the battery is the same thing. If
Absolutely.
battery crosses $50 a kilowatt hour, every household will have 10 kilowatt hour battery. That's a $500. It's like any large washing machine. And if your consumption, not many people consume more than 20 kilowatt hour a day. So, I mean, world is a very different place then. So many things will be stranded asset. It's just unthinkable.
Yeah, and we need to keep raising awareness of this, because I remember when I was working in Brussels, in the solar PV area, a lot of decision makers just weren't aware of the economics of PV. That they were still thinking the prices they were 5 years behind in terms of prices, basically. And a lot of people still today are not aware that we've reached this tipping point where solar and wind can compete with conventional sources of power, and the impact of the merit order effect and everything else. So we need people like you to make sure that and many others to make sure that we raise awareness of these facts in terms of prices and how far prices have come down, because it is really unimaginable the change we've seen over the last 10 years. And there is still this perception that green is somehow expensive. And I think the story of solar and the story of battery storage and the story of electric vehicles busts that myth, and we need to keep busting that myth.
Yeah, I mean, electric vehicle, the best is one of our client, Ministry of Energy, Philippines. Many years ago when I was trying to do a tricycle project, he was telling that, I got asked by someone, do you think this tricycle can go up 30% slope? And I said, how do you answer? He said, yes, of course. But then he explained, and I used that from since then. He said, have you been to a hospital? I said, yes, of course. Have you been to one of those lifts that takes about 50 people? He said, yeah. And then it goes straight up? Yes. That's an electric car. It's driven by a motor. Okay. So you can make it as big as you want. It just needs a larger motor.
Yeah.
So same thing with the sun, saying, have you been outside? I mean, this thing is heating up. It was -8 in the morning. Now it's 30 degrees. It's heating up the whole city. So just looking at a panel, someone says, it's tiny. No, but it's a bigger things behind it.
That's right. And you know, I was driving through Germany just last weekend on the German motorways, which famously have no speed limit at all. And I tell you, I swear, some of the fastest cars on that motorway were the Teslas and the electric cars. So you can tell him to head down to the German Autobahn and see for himself just how fast these things can go.
Yeah, and I think it is just the issue of mindset, and I think also comes in from people not being exposed to, and also it's sort of in your own circle. It's a self reinforcing position. So how do we how do we bring in more young people into the system? I think that's the most important challenge for climate change, how do you bring more in young politicians, if you like, more in the
Yeah.
government decision making in every organization? So
Yeah.
how do you break the status quo?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. And also, how do we, because I see a lot of young people that are really losing faith in the more traditional political system and looking to activism outside of that system and outside of traditional party politics as well. And so how do we harness that energy and try and, somehow convince them that it is still worth working within the existing system to achieve change, right? And I think in many ways young people have got this issue more than older generations, and there's a need for many young school strikers here in Europe, for example, to do some education with their parents, just as Greta Thunberg from Sweden did with her own parents. Her parents were not interested in climate change, really. They were opera singers and something else, and it was she that did all this research and then came to the dinner table with this list of facts that made them realize our daughter's right. We do need to start doing something about this because this is really serious. And I think I think young people understand, young people are aware. We need to do more to spread the awareness and the sense of agency, the sense of being able to act to more young people. And they need to help educate their parents and grandparents as well.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the motivation for me starting this podcast and also whatever I do on the LinkedIn. I remember I was walking in Melbourne, I think about 3-4 years ago, and these kids who were in on a school uniform, all the climate change placards. And so I asked one of them saying, who is telling you all these things? So our school teacher, but he cannot. So we Google, we learn. And then I was saying, I felt as a professional, maybe I can be that bridge in whatever little way possible to give them information, connect them with a wider world that will help them maybe say the same thing a bit louder, maybe a bit with a little bit more confidence.
Yeah.
Because sometimes everything needs to be backed up by data, right?
That's right. And I am also worried that we are seeing in some parts of the world a bit of a sort of anti-science movement.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen that a bit around the COVID crisis, and we see it around the climate crisis a bit. And that's worrying. We've seen it even around Brexit in the UK, people saying we are fed up of experts and we want to do X, Y, Z. And that is worrying because I think we do need to maintain a respect for facts and for science and for the integrity of knowledge and in every part of society. And so we need to be careful about all this fake news, as is currently a fashionable term, and make sure that we maintain the integrity of good sort of public service news outlets and broadcasting and so on, in order to counter some of this anti-science movement that we see in different parts of the world and in different topics in parts of society as well. And
Okay.
In many ways, the anti-vaccine movement is another example of a global social movement that arguably isn't entirely based on facts. And it's those kinds of things that I think are quite concerning in many ways.
Yes, true. But okay, let me test something else. About few years back, there was a Toastmasters international competition, the
Mm.
public speaking club. And the
Yeah.
champion, who does very dramatically, you can look up the speech, he smokes and tries to tell people smoking is good for your health. And then suddenly then he turns around and said, listen, it's so easy to convince you. And the
Yeah.
message that he was trying to make, that climate change is a communication failure, because our
Yeah.
scientists are talking to themselves, fellow scientists. They are a good communicator in a way. I mean, they cannot talk
No.
without their technical mumbo jumbo. So his view was, if all the scientists could communicate half as good as the politicians, climate change is no longer a problem. So how
Mm.
do you react to that? I think there's a big responsibility to be able, for all of us, to be able to demystify things and communicate in a way that is understandable by common people, no?
That's right. That's right. And also communicate it in a way that this is about looking after what we have inherited from previous generations and passing it on to future generations in a fit state, right? It's
No.
about
I understand the principle, but I wanted to be a bit more specific. One of my colleagues, about 3, 4 years ago, he was very nice and candid. He said, "Listen, why people worry about 2 degrees, 2.5 degrees? Today is 30 degree, as average is 28. It's okay. I can take up to 35. Why you worry?" And if that is the opinion of someone quite senior in a government system, what hope
yeah.
you have for the average person on the street appreciating what it means? No?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it needs to be communicated so much better and with so much less scientific jargon. I think that's absolutely right. And I go back to Greta Thunberg, I think in many ways, she and all the other young people that she is working with have tried to communicate this in a different way and to communicate the urgency without going into all the technical specifications and so on, specificities. And I think there is a real need to think about how we communicate this and how we overcome that feeling of powerlessness and fear and um, that feeling that there's nothing we can do about this, that it's too big for each and every one of us. It's too big even for our individual countries. We need to think about how we can overcome those kinds of barriers as well.
No, but I am very optimist now, through this podcast process and some others. I was lucky enough to meet some of the young people, a bundle of energy, and not going to take no for an answer. So these sort of people. So I think the world has a very bright future for sure. So what you would suggest a young entrepreneur or someone who wants to get into climate change, do something about it? What's your suggestion for such a young person?
I think in many ways it's not for me I think young people are coming up with so many interesting ideas of how to solve these different challenges using new platforms, apps to deliver the circular economy and recycling and reuse, for example. I think my message is, apply your creativity and your entrepreneurial spirit to these challenges and thereby make sure that in your life's work you are also contributing to leaving the world a better place than when you found it. And don't let go of your ideas. The partners and the funding for your business plan is out there as long as you can find them. And so I think I really encourage everyone to apply their intellectual abilities to all the different challenges that we face, the global climate challenge, but also the challenge of aging populations and the challenge of air pollution and the challenge of social issues, to apply all the technology and the know-how and the solutions that we have now to solving these challenges. And I do also really recommend that young people really think about how we need global cooperation on many of these issues, and how we need to encourage and foster that multilateral international cooperation system, because I do worry that we are seeing some trends around the world of looking inwards in each individual country and trends away from global cooperation. And I think then that we need young people to buck that trend and to think about how they can work with similar people to them in other countries around the world, how they can connect with those people using different platforms and social media in order to solve this together. Because I think ultimately we solve it together or not at all. We solve it through our recovery from the COVID crisis or not at all. And it's young people who will solve it or not at all. And so I really encourage people to work together, to apply their intellectual abilities to this, and to harness all the technology that we have at our disposal in order to do this. And for example, take blockchain technology. Blockchain technology, this very new cryptocurrency and this new way of storing and sharing information between people, could potentially be applied to all of this to amazing effect. I wrote a report on how blockchain and other digital technologies could be applied to solar PV, and how you could have these micro payment systems where we could have local solar hybrid microgrids, and people can make these micro payments over blockchain technology that would create this high trust system. That is the kind of innovation that's really exciting and really interesting, and young people get this in a way that the old generation that we currently have as leaders in many of our countries don't. And there is so much potential in this, and I really encourage people to harness that potential to help solve this issue.
Okay, resource and financing, right? That tons and tons of money out there looking for climate change projects, looking for brilliant ideas. So do you want to point our listeners to some of the places where they can get facts on climate change, and also all the climate funding, where to look for?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, in terms of where to go, I think there are so many different places. There are so many different sources. There are many different venture capitalists in the private sector that are looking to invest in new big ideas. There's a lot of investment, a lot of money available in terms of public finance as well. I work specifically on public banks like the World Bank, like other multilateral development banks, like the Asian Development Bank, that then lend to other local banks in different regions and countries and localities and municipalities in order to lend on to high impact projects. And so I would definitely recommend looking at all those places. I also think, like I said, there are ways of raising money in unconventional ways as well. I worked with a company called SolarCoin that raised money by doing one of those initial coin offerings, again via sort of Bitcoin and blockchain technology that way as well. So you can crowdsource and find community-based ways of financing good ideas and financing renewables projects, as well as the traditional methods. So don't give up, be creative. If one door closes, see whether the next door might be open to you, and think creatively in terms of private finance, in terms of public finance, and also in terms of crowdsourced finance, because all those options are potential solutions to these kinds of entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and also one very simple thing people don't, because I work on a multi country setting. Just you said, oh, someone is doing that. So all information is available, public domain. If you just take it out, twist a bit, put it there, you can implement, because just South-South cooperation, just taking one idea from one jurisdiction into another, can be tremendous value add right there without much effort. So
Yeah,
that itself could be innovation, no? Uh,
absolutely.
I mean, I very strongly believe for coal, gas, and even oil, of course, that the famous saying that a Saudi minister used many years back, right? Stone Age came to an end, not because they run out of stone, right? Because of technology. I think that's going to happen to all fossil fuels, no? You might be
That's right.
sitting on lots of oil and gas, but there is no use.
That's right. And I think back to what one of the sort of entrepreneurs in the electrification of the United States of America said back in the, whenever it was, the early 1900s. Oh, we're going to have electricity that's too cheap to meter, too cheap to meter. And in a sense, that's actually, that prophecy is going to be delivered by zero marginal cost solar and wind.
Yeah.
The electricity is going to become too cheap to meter, and we're going to have surpluses to then invest in other sectors of the economy, you know? And so we need to totally rethink our energy system and totally rethink our electricity markets to take account of the fact that we're going to have solar and wind and other forms of renewable electricity that is too cheap to meter, just as Thomas Edison and his friends early on in the early 1900s said back in America. And I think it's right, you know, the Stone Age didn't come to an end for a lack of stones. It came to an end because technology moved on, and I think that's what we're seeing here as well.
Yeah, you don't want to end up holding a lot of stones. I think that's the message, right?
They weigh you down, and that it's hard work to carry them uphill.
Yeah,
It's
and
going
it
to
has no
become a
value.
real uphill battle. Yeah,
Thank you very much, Sonia, for your time. That was lovely. I hope we explored quite a number of areas.
that's right.
Let's
Yeah.
keep in touch, and I hope in the next couple of years things will be very different from where we are.
I think so. I think so. I think it will. You know, I go between moments of despair and moments of hope, as I think everyone else does. But I think we're heading in the right direction.